So you've become the Elden Lord, but before you it was Radagon, and before him it was Godfrey, who items call the first Elden Lord. And yet even before Godfrey there was another, Placidusax, an ancient dragon who ruled as Elden Lord in the prehistoric age before the Erd Tree. It's him and his kin that you're going to be learning about in this video. But to quickly summarize, first there were the ancient dragons who had these stone scales that could twist time, making them essentially immortal. And yet some ancient dragons can be found dead, buried in the rocks of Farum Azula, which twists and crumbles in an eternal storm. On the ground, their descendants roam the lands between without the stone scales of their ancestors, and instead of stone scales, they've inherited aspects of their environments. The ice dragons roamed the icy mountaintops. The glintstone dragons feasted on sorcerers. One's hatred was so strong that he even endured the scarlet rot in Caelid. And it's here in Caelid that Grail, mother of all the mortal dragons, lies dying. There's a lot to talk about. This is the story of Elden Ring's dragons. Many item descriptions note that the age of the ancient dragons was prehistoric, and I think that's an important word because it might explain why Godfrey's recorded title is the first Elden Lord, even though he's not. Placidusax is. The word prehistoric denotes a period of time before written history, and while there are spoken legends from this time, I think what they're trying to get across is that the Elden Lord before Godfrey wouldn't be well known. This was before the age of the Erd Tree after all, and the Erd Tree would eventually come to be considered perfect and eternal. So the idea that there might have even been an Elden Lord that came before could have been considered irrelevant at best and sacrilegious, I think, at worst. But what really is an Elden Lord, and why was Placidusax considered one? I feel like the role of Elden Lord can be roughly narrowed down to three things. You are made eligible by A, your strength, B, your validity as a consort, and or C, your willingness to bring about a new age or order. Specifically, the Elden Lord is tasked with bringing about the Greater Will's order, one built around the Elden Ring that it sent here long ago, hence the name Elden Lord. Sounds simple, but then remember, the nature of the Greater Will's order can vary wildly, as is shown by all who come to champion it over the ages. The Greater Will's order is malleable enough that it can even accept a number of endings that our Tarnished brings about, where the Elden Ring is mended by runes that will dramatically redefine the world. So it is that our role as a Tarnished is actually pretty unique, as our primary goal now is to reunite the broken shards of the Elden Ring. With Marika, the god that is the vessel of the Elden Ring, locked away inside the Erd Tree, it's not up to her to will a new age into being, it's up to us, and we have to gather the great runes to do this. So it is that in most endings, you ascend the throne as Elden Lord alone, without a god or living consort by your side. Instead, your crumbling god is a vessel for your Elden Ring, and not much more. But previously, it seems an Elden Lord was chosen by their god, chosen for their strength, chosen to sire a lineage, chosen for their usefulness to their god's order. So it was that Hoarah was chosen to be the Elden Lord as the Age of the Erd Tree began. He defeated Marika's enemies, he sired the Golden Lineage, and then was discarded in favor of Radagon, an Elden Lord who betrayed Marika's enemies and sired more demigod children with her before being shattered alongside his god. And since we don't actually know much about Placidusax's god, we rely on Hoarah and Radagon and Marika as well to teach us the things that we should assume would have been traditionally true about her. So it is that Placidusax's god likely chose him as Elden Lord because Placidusax was powerful, politically expedient, loyal, and or perhaps a valid consort. And speaking of Elden Lords being consorts, it's certainly possible that Placidusax consorted with his god, but I don't think that means that all or any of the ancient dragons would have been the result of that union. In fact, as noted by Zuli the Witch, the heads of Placidusax are different and are labelled as male and female respectively, so who's to say Placidusax didn't spawn their own ancient dragons? Whatever the case, the ancient dragons were exceptionally loyal to their lord, and multiple item descriptions state that the ancient dragons who ruled in the prehistoric era before the Erd Tree would protect their lord as a wall of living rock. This is why the shape of the dragon has become symbolic of all manner of protections, and indeed we commonly see dragons on shields and on damage reduction talismans. But even without his kin laying down their lives to protect him, Placidusax is intensely powerful in their own right. In fact, I'd say that Placidusax was likely chosen as Elden Lord for their strength in battle. And the physical evidence of battle is all there. Their form is severely scarred, and even his heads have been severed in unknown fights. I think it's fair to speculate that Placidusax put their life on the line for their god, just as Elden Lords would do for their gods in years to come, and just as his ancient dragons did for him. But what exactly is an ancient dragon? To help us distinguish between all of the dragons in the game, it's important to note that not all dragons in Elden Ring are of the ancient variety. Most are actually lesser wyverns like these. Though they're all descended from the same stock, ancient dragons specifically are characterized by their mastery of red lightning, as well as their 4 wings, 4 limbs, and stone scales. These stone scales are perhaps their most defining characteristic. You would have found these stone scales in your playthrough. They would have been looted as gravel stones, which are said to be the scales of the ancient dragons. These gravel stones can be used to craft dragon wound grease, a weapon buff that increases the damage you deal to dragons. It reads, "When the dragons were born from their ancient kin, they lost their stone scales, which can now be used to cause them mortal harm." Talk about insult to injury. So just like in Dark Souls, it's these stone scales that gave the ancient dragons their signature immortality. And as further evidence for that fact, consider the Dragon King's Cragblade, which reveals that today's dual-winged, 2-legged dragons are considered paltry and mortal, again confirming that the ancient dragons were immortal by way of comparison. But why are they immortal? Well, the mechanism behind this immortality is revealed by the ancient dragon smithing stone's description, which marks it as a golden gravel stone and a scale of the ancient Dragonlord. Most importantly though, it reads, "This stone lightly twists time." Therefore, it's Placidusax's very scales, and likely also those of his kin, that have time-twisting properties, explaining the ancient dragon's longevity. It seems they're immune to the effects of time. This also explains why Placidusax's Old Lord's talisman messes with time, lengthening the duration of sorceries and incantations in the hands of the Tarnished. Most interesting though is that the smithing stone goes on to state that it allows for the creation of a weapon capable of slaying a god. Presumably this is because of the scale's time-twisting abilities, which I theorize might help to sort of undo the god that gets smacked with this from existing in the first place. Maybe time undoes them in that way, or perhaps it speeds up their eventual irrelevancy over time. It's really fitting that a god would be weak to time and nothing else, really. Now, scales twisting time is one thing, but all of Farum Azula seems to exist outside of time to some extent. There is no day and night cycle here, for example, and this time-twisting effect is particularly strong in Placidusax's arena, which you access by lying down at the very edge of his storm. In a way, you kind of become a part of the environment here in this moment, as the space you're lying in is actually a shallow grave meant for entombment. It's just missing a skeleton, whereas the other graves have them. And now that you're part of Farum Azula itself, time stops, then actually begins to bring you backwards in time with the repairing ruins to Placidusax's Farum, where the Dragonlord once dwelled eternally beyond time. So, time is extremely convoluted in Placidusax's arena. And I say this because it's here, in the heart of the storm beyond time, that you're able to use an item called Miquella's Needle, which is one of the unalloyed gold needles that Miquella crafted to ward away the meddling of outer gods. Now, currently, this needle is only a temporary solution. It only wards off the outer god's influence. It doesn't cure one of it, as Melania is evidence of. Indeed, the final silver version of the needle reveals that the needle is still, as yet, unfinished, and can only be used in the heart of the storm beyond time said to be found in Farum Azula. It's here alone that the needle does finally function fully, removing the entire influence of the outer god in your body. Miquella originally intended to use this needle to repel the outer god of rot within his sister, but here, if you're locked into the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending, you can use the needle to cheat fate and undo the Frenzy God's influence instead. This reveals that the final missing component of the needle is time. It just needs this final time-twisting effect to be complete. So, as with the smithing stones we just mentioned, perhaps you are inserting the needle at a point before the outer god's influence existed upon you, or perhaps the gods are simply, again, weak to time's effects. I wonder if Miquella knew this. I wonder if he knew that time twisting was what was needed to complete the needle. And I wonder if he even realized that this is a place you could come to do that. Anyway, the one weird thing about Miquella's needle is that you can use it in Placidusax's arena even though he's dead, raising the question, hang on, if it's Placidusax's scales that twist time, why is it time is being twisted here in a location, even without him and his scales present? Now, I do have a theory that might reconcile this issue. Remember how I brought up that time only starts moving backwards when you lie down in a burial space and become a part of the environment? Well, my theory is that what if it's the landmass of Farum Azula itself that also twists time? I think it might be able to do this because the landmass literally has ancient dragons and their time-twisting scales entombed within it. The official art book reveals a ton of these ancient dragons, and indeed, ancient dragons can be found within Farum Azula's geological stratum. I asked data miner Zuli the Witch to take a closer look at these assets, and she discovered that there are 2 variants of these entombed dragons that show up here, 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 and here. So 4 dragons in total that we can see, at least. At first I thought that these might represent Placidusax's missing heads, but the intact variant of the model displays 4 wings and 4 legs, meaning these were entire ancient dragons. That said, they don't look entirely like ancient dragons. In fact, their heads are actually the same as Placidusax's, albeit rendered in a lower level of detail. So, personally, given the information I have, I believe that this suggests that these entombed dragons might be Placidusax's offspring, or kin, perhaps even an older generation of ancient dragon, entombed in a previous geological stratum of Farum Azula's ancient history. So it is that I think you can argue that the landmass of Farum Azula itself can twist time. But additionally, or alternatively, Farum Azula's storm itself might represent this time twisting. Miquella's needle does say that it can only be used in the heart of the storm in Farum Azula, so perhaps Placidusax's golden scales sort of twisted a storm into being, and maybe that storm twists time irrespective of whether Placidusax is alive or not. Also, I really like the idea that twisting storms are a visual representation of the scales that twist time, because the scales do specifically use the word twist in regards to time, so the storm and these twisting hurricanes are so perfect visually for that. But as we move into the next chapter, I want to point out one more interesting thing about these golden scales, and it's that according to their item descriptions, they're only made into stones after being polished. And thanks to their older item description text in version 1.0 of Elden Ring, we know exactly who it was that polished these stones in the first place. They were refined by sentient beasts that regarded them as holy relics. So it is that we arrive at the Beastmen of Farum Azula, who were the ancient dragon's clergymen, worshippers, and lessers. There are a few types of beastmen in Farum Azula, but most wield their signature curved sword, a weapon that is forged from dull iron, but is so well designed that despite its weight, it's comparatively easy to wield for the damage it delivers. This skill in smithing seems to extend to their thrown weapons as well, which boomerang through the air towards you like nothing else in the lands between. As the Beastman Cleaver itself states, it's clear the Beastmen possess knowledge beyond human ken. As you start to progress towards the latter half of Farum Azula, you'll start to be assailed by red lightning, wielded by the Beastman clergy. Some warriors even carry weapons blessed with its effects. This is significant because red lightning is explicitly called the weapon wielded by the ancient dragons. Lightning in From Software games has always been a weapon of divinity, and those that wield it are naturally the blessed adherents of that divinity. In this case, the divines were the ancient dragons who wielded this lightning within the storms of Farum Azula. So, for the beastmen to wield it, the art was probably taught to them. For additional context, one of the only other characters who wields a weapon imbued with red lightning is Vike, a tarnished beloved by an ancient dragon. Indeed, certain beastmen were quote-unquote chosen or blessed in a similar way, with the Azula Beastman Spirit Ashes stating that Farum Azula's giant mausoleum was guarded by chosen beastmen who wield weapons clad in lightning. For more evidence of the Beastmen's reverence of ancient dragons, we can look to the 5 sites of grace in Farum Azula that mark different sections of the Dragon Temple, a sprawling place of worship that features multiple statues of beast clergymen bent in reverence towards ancient dragon statues. And the central part of the Dragon Temple is this, the place where you would have fought the Godskin duo, an altar overshadowed by an enormous dragon skeleton. For reference, these skeletal remains dwarf even Placidusax, and are matched only in size by the dragon Grail and the ancient dragon Grandsax, both of whom we'll discuss a little bit later. The Azula Beastman Spirit Ashes state that Farum Azula is said to be the remains of a giant mausoleum enshrining an ancient dragon, and given this dragon's prominent placement in the Dragon Temple of all places, I actually think the enshrined dragon in question might be this one, though you could certainly make the argument that the enshrined ancient dragon was Placidusax instead. But regardless of exactly what it's enshrining, Farum Azula really is just a huge mausoleum, with burial customs literally around every corner. Considering all the jars in this place, one such type of burial that comes to mind is jar burial, a practice documented in ancient human cultures all across the globe. Now, this practice would show up more explicitly later in Elden Ring's timeline, with the living jars, which are literally filled with the interred remains of powerful warriors. But beyond the powerful funerary imagery in Farum Azula, there's actually no explicit evidence that I can find that suggests actual entombment within these jars. In contrast, the Beastman's jar shield is quite clear that the Beastmen have always fired earthenware jars for the express purpose of making shields. The description comments that these ways are strange, and I feel like I can offer a strange theory here. We know that the Beastmen value golden stone scales, right? And we know that There are literally ancient dragons entombed within the earth of Farum Azula. So what if the beastmen value the dragon-infused earth for this reason, firing pots from this dragon earth in an initial burial custom, then breaking them to use as sacred shields? We established earlier that the golden-scaled ancient dragons are a symbol of protection, and considering these are earthenware shields that are flecked with the same golden hue as their scales, I feel like this theory is alright. It's the only way I can rationalize making shields out of pots that are made out of earth, anyway. Somewhat predictably, the beastmen practice entombment of their own species as well. And I'm not just talking about their gold-adorned tombs, I'm talking about their entombment in the architecture itself as well. The skeletal remains of the beastmen frequently show up within the architecture of Farum Azula itself. This reminds me of the historical practice of immurement, which was this sort of horrific form of capital punishment, usually, where the subject was entombed in a structure while alive. That said, there are historical examples of immurement being more about human sacrifice, a part of a grand burial ceremony in some cultures, and believed to make buildings sturdier in others. And I feel like it would have been the beastmen who built the architecture of Farum Azula, not the dragons themselves. It is structured to be a mausoleum, after all, and since it's the beastmen who revere the ancient dragons, it's naturally the beastmen who would have occupied the labor roles in society. That said, I guess humans also could have built it, since humans are depicted in the architectural reliefs of Farum Azula. So it stands to reason that humans were a part of this culture as well, even at this early prehistoric period of time, which is kind of crazy considering how much humans contrast with the beastmen here. As with a lot of the architecture in From Software games, I feel like it would be a bit dishonest of me not to mention that these, in particular, are reused assets, also present in Bloodborne. So it's possible that From Software didn't expect us to read into these assets too hard, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that they at least wanted to suggest that there was a human presence in Farum Azula once. So, not only were humans present, but they were worthy of being enshrined. Who were they? Well, our biggest clues about different types of humans comes from origin text in the character creation screen, and there are two human types in particular that I think might be a match for the humans in these reliefs. First are the Numen. The Numen are supposed descendants of denizens of another world, and the Numen's rune tells us that the Numen are said to have come from outside the lands between. Considering Farum Azula experienced a cultural revolution with the coming of the Greater Will and the Elden Ring, which arrived upon an extraterrestrial star, I wouldn't be surprised if Numenoid humans came along for the ride as well. Alternatively, the character creator reveals lore for the stony face of the people of the ancient dragons, among whom life is typically short. It certainly seems to be suggesting that these humans are descended from the ancient dragons. Why else would it note their stony faces, or their short lives in contrast to the ancients? As we'll discover later, ancient dragons can turn into humans, so perhaps they intermingled at some point in the past to create these humans. That said, this is all just speculation, and a human presence on Farum Azula is otherwise quite hard to process, considering the beasts are clearly the legacy of Farum Azula. For it was the beasts who would gain intelligence and shape the world around them, not humans. Ancient historians have long speculated that it was the development of long, opposable thumbs that helped facilitate early humans' use of tools. Similarly, in Elden Ring, having 5 fingers is something to be celebrated, as is revealed by the Cinder-tier, a weapon of the beast clergyman. This item description is one of those ones that is just hugely significant for the lore. The name Cinder-tier means 5 fingers, and it visually shows 5 skeletal fingers on the blade. The item description goes on to state that the design celebrates a beast's 5 fingers, symbolic of the intelligence once granted upon their kind. So before there were beastmen, there were simply beasts here, and it was the bestowal of intelligence, which is equated with having 5 fingers, that led to the beast men. This of course begs the question, who or what bestowed intelligence upon the beast men? And luckily it's a simple one to answer. It was the Greater Will. The Greater Will is all about fingers. It speaks through the 2 fingers, it hates if you have 3 fingers, it will tolerate 4 fingers, but 5 is the amount to be celebrated. Or at least, it was long ago. And if this veneration of fingers wasn't enough evidence for you, well, the 1.0 version of the Cinder-tier literally states that it was the Greater Will who granted the beasts intelligence. So, that's that. The Greater Will clearly also has a bit of a thing for acting through beasts. Just look at the final boss, it's an Elden beast, one that the Greater Will sent hurtling into the lands between so that it could later become the Elden Ring. And in this prehistoric period, the ancient dragons would be graced by the Greater Will first, with the beastmen later being granted intelligence as well, all the better to revere the ancient dragons with. According to bestial incantations, stones were the first weapons of the beasts who had gained intelligence. And having gained intelligence, the beasts must have felt how their wildness slipped away as civilization took hold. Of course, this is yet another example where the Greater Will takes away wildness or chaos in favor of order. It seems to care little what form that order takes, it only cares that some order takes hold, preferably taking hold with a full 5-fingered fist. In-game, the 5-fingered Cinder-tier is wielded by Geraint, the beast clergyman. According to the weapon, it is only given to high-ranking clergymen of Farum Azula, marking Geraint as one of their number. Presumably, this means he is, or was, a clergyman of the ancient dragon faith, before being repurposed by the Greater Will, becoming a shadow for Marika instead. After all, when we encounter him in-game, the age of the ancient dragons has long passed, yet he still achieves relevancy in this age, in yet another subservient role, as is common to all beasts, except this time it's to Marika, and this time he is a shadow of the Empyrean, which is a topic we should touch on next. We first meet Geraint at the Bestial Sanctum, a place in Caelid that bears a striking resemblance to Farum Azula. There's even a bridge down the way called Farum Great Bridge, with a dragon defending it, no less. These are no mere ruins that have fallen from the sky. This architecture is intact and must have been built for and by the beasts at some point after they received intelligence. We'll get into that point a little bit later, but for now, let's focus on Geraint. We first learn about Geraint from his bestial incantations, which are given to us when we hand him Deathroot. They read, "Long ago, Geraint was a beast of such terrifying ferocity that his former name meant Death of the Demigods." This former name in question was Malekith, a new name to suit his new purpose, which was to seal away the rune of destined death for Marika, who was his Empyrean. So first he was Geraint. Then, as the age of the ancient dragons ended and Marika became a force in the world, Geraint became known as Malekith instead, who was, and I quote, a shadow-bound beast given to his Empyrean, who was Marika. Marika had one job for Malekith, and that was to lock away destined death. To a degree, he fails at this task, and a fragment of destined death is stolen, becoming the Deathroot that spreads throughout the lands. So it is that Geraint has returned to the lands between now, trying desperately to scrape together all the Deathroot in the world. The Beast Claw incantation talks about his present identity, as this spell represents the fury of Geraint, his bestial nature returned as much as it does his restless agitation. But after realizing his mission is impossible, Geraint pieces out, and then we're only able to find him in one place alone, Farum, where he has ascended with a draconic tree sentinel as his defender. Here, he sort of exists outside of time, defending what remains of destined death within his very own flesh. It's easy to get confused about when Geraint exists in the game, so apologies for skipping over this topic quickly, but this video is about dragons after all, and the main thing I really want to get across here is just how much the beasts have been repurposed to suit the needs of the Greater Will. First it gave them intelligence, and then they served the Ancient Dragon's order, but then when the Ancient Dragon's age ended, beasts like Geraint were given new purpose, commonly as shadowbound entities, compelled to serve order once more, whatever form their Empyreans dictated that order should take. The Raging Wolf set states that, according to the old legends, wolves are the shadows of the Empyrean. It's certainly possible that this legend originated in Farum. There is, after all, a statue that features 3 wolves deferring to a human woman. It might be a stretch to assume that this is depicting wolves as shadows of the Empyrean, but I thought I'd mention it, at least. Again, in case you've forgotten, an Empyrean is basically one of the Greater Will's candidates for godhood, and in Marika and Ranni's case, at least, they were granted wolves as their shadows. Wolves who evolved to be man's best friend, as they say, are defined as such because of their loyalty. And as stated by the Beast Champion Helm, the beasts, their eyes and ears covered, represent an oath: see nothing, hear nothing, doubt nothing, and carry on, along the path set in stone. And so it is that Geraint and Blythe are wolves completely loyal to their Empyreans, dedicated to protecting their lords just like the ancient dragons of old. This loyalty to the Greater Will and also their Empyreans causes this fantastic tension within these characters. In the case of Geraint, he was loyal to Marika, but now lives impatiently with this impossible task of having to recover every piece of Deathroot. And in the case of Blythe, his loyalty to Ranni eventually forces him to betray the Two Fingers, in complete defiance of the fate that he was born to. Speaking of which, Blythe is quite unique from Geraint. Unlike Geraint, he has no apparent ties to Farum. After all, unlike Geraint, he was created to be Ranni's Empyrean and grew up with her in a more modern age that was far removed from Farum. Perhaps this is why Blythe takes on a much more human form. Blythe was created in a much more modern age than the beasts of old, so it seems the Two Fingers skipped a lot of the history and simply created Blythe in a more half-man image, creating him from scratch as opposed to his forebears. The other beast worth mentioning here is Sarosh, the ethereal beast regent given to Godfrey to weigh down his ceaseless lust for battle. Of course, Godfrey is Elden Lord, not an Empyrean. Just so, Sarosh is not a wolf, but a lion. Like Geraint, he has a longer history, and according to the Beast Claw Greathammer, he was, at one point, a lord of beasts, with black nails protruding from golden fur. To quote the champion set, beasts are drawn to champions and to lords, and this holds true for the beastmen drawn to Sarosh, and in the future it would hold true for Sarosh himself, a beast that became Lord Godfrey's regent, intended to guide him and his golden lineage, so Sarosh was drawn to Godfrey as well. But no matter who the beasts were loyal to, whether it was to their beast lords, or to the ancient dragons, or then Elden lords or Empyreans, throughout all of this, they were always following a deeper loyalty, a loyalty to the Greater Will and its ancient Elden Ring. This Elden Ring looks very different. For one, it appears to have many more circlets, many more great runes than the modern Elden Ring. Considering its placement in Farum, Azula, a place from long ago, I speculate that this is an ancient variant of the Elden Ring, a depiction of it back during the era of the ancient dragons. What's more, this ancient Elden Ring has what appear to be roots snaking down and descending from it. This is in contrast to the modern Elden Ring, which has this latticed pattern instead. The latticed pattern is most commonly seen as a symbol of Radagon, an Elden rune that is visible on his statues and his scar seal as well. I always thought that the latticed pattern might represent Radagon's efforts to sort of stitch the Elden Ring back together when it was shattered, and we'll speculate on what the roots might mean a little bit later as well. As for why the Elden Ring looks different though, well, it makes sense that the Elden Ring would have changed throughout the ages. We know the thing is malleable, after all. There are examples of runes being taken out of it and put back into it, depending on the specific needs of the god who acts as a vessel for its power, or the needs of the Tarnished who will become Elden Lord via great runes, or even via mending runes. The vessel of the Elden Ring we know in the modern era is Marika. She literally has the Elden Ring entombed within her. But back in the age before the Erd Tree, the Elden Ring would have had a different vessel, a different god, and unfortunately, all we know about them is that they abandoned Placidusax, who was their Elden Lord. The remembrance of the Dragonlord reads, "The Dragonlord, whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time, is said to have been Elden Lord in the age before the Erd Tree. Once his god was fled, the Lord continued to await its return." I'm assuming that his god had a female aspect, considering all the other Empyreans and gods in Elden Ring do. So it is that when we find Placidusax, he is in a state of eternal maidenlessness. And who knows how long Placidusax has been waiting for his god to return. In fact, one community theory I love that I've seen put forward a few times is that Placidusax's pose is similar to that of the two fingers after you were rejected by the Erd Tree. In case you forgot, it's at this stage that Enya says the two fingers have taken up this pose because they're busy consulting with the greater will. Just so, the same might be true of Placidusax, who has also been spurned by his god and the greater will, and is trying, perhaps, to commune with them. To take this analogy further, Placidusax has two heads now, but data recently uncovered by Zuli the Witch suggests that he once had 5, not unlike how the two fingers, assumedly, once came from a full 5-fingered hand. That said, the Old Lord's talisman depicts Placidusax with 4 heads. To reconcile this contradiction, maybe we can just think that he had 4 heads when this talisman was made, perhaps? Anyway, not a big deal. What is a big deal is Placidusax's god, who represents this huge blind spot for us in Elden Ring's lore. We don't know who they were, we don't know what powers they had, and we don't know when or why they left or what age they really wanted to bring about. As such, I'll be calling them the Nameless God from this point forwards. Whoever they were, all we know for certain is that they once saw Placidusax as a valid Elden Lord, so they might have been all about the age of the ancient dragons once. However, I feel like it says more about this god that they fled this age and abandoned their loyal Elden Lord. This reminds me a lot of what Marika did to her Elden Lord, Godfrey, exiling and abandoning him after he had won her wars and outlived his usefulness. Though, at least with Godfrey, Marika had a secret plan for her Elden Lord and his tarnished kin to return. On the other hand, Placidusax was abandoned, and has waited for an eternity, only to die at the hands of our tarnished. So, whoever his god was, I feel like they really did abandon him entirely. The Greater Will's gods are the vessels of the Elden Ring, and Placidusax's Nameless God jumping ship with the Elden Ring would have surely represented an enormous upheaval to what became crumbling Farum Azula. Speaking of which, I still haven't really explained how it became crumbling Farum Azula. Many descriptions state that Farum Azula has been crumbling since time immemorial, and it's for this reason that you can find tiny ruin fragments and enormous ones too scattered all over the lands between. This is better explained by the description of one such ruin fragment, which was honed into a weapon called the Ruin's Greatsword. This is one of the legendary armaments, originally rubble from a ruin which fell from the sky. The ruin it came from crumbled when struck by a meteorite. As such, this weapon harbors its destructive power. So meteorites with destructive power are these purple spells in Elden Ring, and indeed this weapon's skill is Waves of Destruction, which manifests as purple energy. So a meteorite crashed into Farum Azula, and that meteorite was purple and imbued the ruins with sort of gravitational magic. But beyond that, there's not really much we know about this meteorite. We don't even know if it struck Farum Azula when it was a city on the ground, lifting the city into the sky with gravitational magic, or if it struck Farum Azula while it was already skybound, crashing into the city while it was in midair. So much of Farum Azula's history is hidden from us. This meteorite might even be the same meteorite as others mentioned in Elden Ring's lore, because lots of meteorites have made landfall in the lands between before. Some brought the Onyx Lords, a race of ancients with skin of stone who rose to life when a meteor struck. A creature called Astel may have brought himself down on a meteorite and destroyed an entire eternal city. A golden star even once bore the Elden Beast and the Elden Ring into the lands between in the first place. Thus, you could speculate that any one of these, or even a different one entirely, laid waste to Farum Azula. Again, you could even speculate that it was this meteor that imbued Farum Azula's ruins with gravitational energy, lifting it into the sky, not unlike how the Earth in Limgrave is lifted into the sky after being hit by a meteorite. And so perhaps, similarly, Farum Azula's world was lifted higher into the sky, twisting in place, also thanks to the stone scales of the ancient dragons. Whatever the case, as Farum Azula crumbled and twisted in the sky, ruin fragments rained down upon the entire lands between, some large and some small. Incidentally, these ruin fragments glow with a faint light from within, and are conducive to blessings from the 2 and 3 fingers respectively. That's what warming stones and frenzy flame stones are. They are pieces of ruin fragments imbued with power and light. And this makes a lot of sense because these ruins are a part of the royal city that the Greater Will itself once graced. So naturally, parts of its ruins are very conducive to the effects of the 2 and 3 fingers. Anyway, we don't know many other details behind Farum Azula's ruin, but whatever the case, it's probably fair to say that this meteorite dealt an enormous blow to their culture. It might have even coincided with their god fleeing the city. And whenever this Nameless God did leave, I think it's important to speculate on where they went next. After the Age of the Dragonlord, the Age of the Erd Tree began. But before the Age of the Erd Tree began, we learned that there was first a crucible of life, a primordial crucible where all life was once blended together. According to Siluria's Crucible Tree Helm, this crucible was the primordial form of the Erd Tree, a manifestation of the Erd Tree's primal vital energies. So, over the next few minutes, I'm going to try and argue that the crucible became rooted quite literally, quite physically, in the great tree roots that we find underneath the lands between. I don't think it's a coincidence that the ancient Elden Ring of Farum Azula is burgeoning with roots. And after Farum Azula's age ended and its god absconded with an Elden Ring that is burgeoning with roots, I don't think it's a coincidence that a primordial crucible gave way to a great tree that would dominate the lands between. I think the Elden Ring physically left Farum Azula. I think that led to the crucible, which led to great tree roots, which led to the Erd tree growing. The Elden Ring is, after all, the source of the Erd tree, and this should have been true for the ancient Elden Ring as well, which would have birthed this tree. As an additional piece of evidence that the Elden Ring is at the source of the Erd tree, we can look to the engraving on the stone door of the Erd tree itself, which shows the Elden Ring literally at the roots of the Erd tree, its source below the surface. Perhaps the Elden Ring wasn't rooted in the earth, while Farum Azula was floating up in the sky, but eventually, it seems, it would be. According to the Gilded Great Shield and Ordovus's Greatsword, the colour of the Erd tree's primordial crucible was red, or perhaps more accurately, red tinged with gold. The red tinge in the gold coat mirrors the primordial matter that became the Erd tree, the colour of homeward yearning. Its red tint exemplifies the nature of primordial gold, said to be close in nature to life itself. This colour is also seen in root resin, a secretion from roots that were once connected to the great tree. These two items, taken together, tie the red of the crucible to great tree roots quite well. And if that wasn't enough, Crucible Knight Siluria spends her exile amidst these roots, with a spear and a helm that have great tree ornamentation that is modelled on the crucible. I've seen people speculate that the crucible isn't a physical place, and that it was just a crucible of competition instead, where different creatures battled against each other. And I think this misconception might be due to the original description of the Old Fang in version 1.0 of Elden Ring, which reads, "In times long past, life was a crucible of competition." However, the item description was quickly patched to remove all mention of competition, and the patched description instead suggests that multiple overlapping fangs might be a vestige of the primordial crucible. So, considering this updated description and all of the colour and mention of primordial matter, I think FromSoft are certainly trying to suggest that the Crucible had a real physicality to it. And the Crucible has long been a topic plagued by confusing and perhaps mistranslated item descriptions. Take the aspects of the Crucible, which say that the Crucible was once a place where all life was once blended together. The Japanese instead clarifies that once life was blended together, which to me suggests the Crucible was a blending of existing life in the lands between, rather than a source of all life. And I think there's more evidence that this ancient Elden Ring of Farum Azula was already kind of laying the groundwork for the Crucible. For example, we know from the Omen and Misbegotten that creatures of the Crucible are characterized by chaotic growth, considered aspects of devolution in the modern era. These are aspects of wings, horns, scales, feathers, and fangs. Just so, Placidusax actually has tons of random fang growths around their maw, and later dragons even sprout feathers, another aspect of devolution. But if that wasn't enough, remember, the dragon's lightning is red, tinted with gold as well, which is the same color of the primordial crucible as we just discussed. Thus, I think it's safe to say that the color and other aspects of the primordial crucible were already kind of present in the ancient dragons, the oldest of those graced by the Elden Ring that we know of. So, with that, we've essentially laid the groundwork for a theory that I'd like to shout out from Loki, who is one of From Software's most dedicated theory crafters. In this theory, he speculates on the identity of the Dragonlord's fled god, and I think this theory is special because it manages to reconcile a couple of major loose ends in the game's lore along the way. As the theory goes, the Erdtree was created as a byproduct of the Nameless God's death. Loki's initial reasoning is that after we die, runes are left behind in our wake, manifesting as small golden saplings. Therefore, since the Elden Ring itself is made up of a gargantuan amount of runes, surely the Elden Ring would sprout an enormous tree if the god vessel carrying it were to die. One thing I'll add to this theory is that our golden saplings only remain so if the mass of runes is not claimed. Just so, if no one knew that the Nameless God had died, perhaps the Elden Ring's mass of runes was left to its own devices, to grow, as Loki posits, as a resilient, protective vessel, a firmly rooted tree that welcometh no man. And indeed, the Nameless God did flee, not even telling her Elden Lord, Placidusax, where they had gone. Thus, their runes might have gone unclaimed. Directly below the Erdtree are the deep root depths, where the Erdtree might have once been planted, so to speak. And one of the lesser-known paths along the roots here leads to this wall, an illusory wall that reveals the Cathedral of the Forsaken, the Frenzied Merchants, and the Three Fingers of Frenzy. One of the strangest items down here is the fingerprint stone shield, which is, and I quote, part of the tomb of an ancient god. It's imprinted with an intricately carved fingerprint design, and these imprints are said to be the very seeds from which Frenzy first sprouted. Now, at first glance, you'd think that the ancient god in question here would be the Three Fingers, who marked this great stone slab with fingerprints, and while I admit this stone grave could be for the outer god of frenzied flame, which manifests as the Three Fingers who are imprisoned down here, I much prefer the theory that this stone slab was the tomb of a different ancient god, one that was found and desecrated by the Three Fingers with their fingerprints, just as they desecrate the world with fingerprints in their ending. And that's exactly what Loki's theory proposes, that the Three Fingers desecrated a stone tomb of the Nameless God, Placidusax's queen, who had her final moments in this place. The Nameless God can also be used to reconcile another lore gap in Elden Ring, which is the identity of the corpse that makes up the Fingerslayer blade. The Fingerslayer blade is a blade said to have been born of a corpse, said to be able to harm the Greater Will and its vassals, the Two Fingers. The shape of this blade, featuring the arms of a corpse as a crossguard and culminating in a double helix, it bears a striking resemblance to the Sacred Relic Sword, a weapon wrenched from the corpse of Radagon Marika. The Sacred Relic Sword is, and I quote, wrought from the remains of a god who should have lived a life eternal. The similarities between the Sacred Relic Sword and the Fingerslayer blade mean that they must have shared a source, not just a corpse, but the corpse of a god. We know where the Sacred Relic Sword comes from. It comes from Radagon and Marika, but then where does the Fingerslayer blade come from? If it's wrought from a god, it's a nameless god, as far as we know. So it is that Loki concludes that the Nox, who made a hidden treasure of the blade, may have recovered the corpse of Placidusax's queen, the nameless god, to wield as a weapon that could harm the Greater Will. So, I like these theories, to say the least. They neatly tie up and reconcile a bunch of loose ends, and that makes these theories really satisfying to believe. It's nice to have an explanation for which god the Fingerslayer blade was talking about, and which ancient god the fingerprint stone shield was talking about. Special thanks to Loki for this. You can find more of his stuff in the description, and I highly recommend you seek it out. However, I should probably stress that this is still all speculation. The circumstantial evidence is really strong, yes, but sometimes From Software leaves these sorts of loose ends in the lore to be tied up by characters that they've yet to introduce, and until DLC drops, I think it's wise to take this theory with a grain of salt. But damn, salt makes any meal taste a little bit better, doesn't it? So it is that the Nameless God of Farum Azula might have become the Nox's Fingerslayer Blade, a weapon they clearly brought about in order to harm the Greater Will, which had banished them deep underground, beneath the false night sky. You can learn more about that in this video. Here they live in eternal anticipation of the coming age of stars and their liege, who would be a Lord of Night. These folk become obsessed with artificial imitation of life above ground, all likely created in service of their goal, which was to strike back at the Greater Will. So it was that the Mimic Tiers were created. These are beings of quicksilver that were the result of an attempt by the Eternal City to forge a lord. These silver drops of dew, not unlike the Erd Tree's drops of dew, they also birthed the Albinaurics, who are artificial life forms untouched by the Erd Tree's grace. But the Nox also looked further back in time for inspiration, apparently, and they attempted to bring ancient dragons into being. So it is that the Dragonkin soldiers were born in the Eternal City, where they knew no true sky nor true lightning. Their name includes the word soldier, and they even have evidence of clothing and armor upon them, again revealing that these creatures were created with the intention to fight back against order. But these Dragonkin experiments went about as well as copying dragons usually does in From Software games, which is to say, the experiments were a failure. The main reason they were considered failures was that these Dragonkin were not immortal, as the Nox had hoped. Their weapons read, "Alas, the Dragonkin soldiers never attained immortality and perished as decrepit, pale imitations of their skyborn kin." But the Nox had the right idea. At the very least, it seems they had identified the source of the ancient dragon's immortality, their stone scales. They just failed to implement that source. Case in point, the dragon scaled blade is made by sharpening a gravel stone scale thought to be the source of dragon immortality. This blade's skill is Ice Lightning Sword, which wreathes the blade in the Dragonkin's signature Ice Lightning. And even though the Dragonkin were born mortal and crippled, they did at least manage to manifest lightning, which is a feat that the mortal dragons, who were actually the ancient dragon's kin, never accomplished. On your way through Caelid, you would have run past Grail, a mortal dragon who clearly owes their namesake to Graol, a veritable mountain found further down the way, where she lies dying, surrounded by her children on her deathbed. But these aren't her only children. According to Grail's roar, Grail was the mother of all dragons, dwarfing all who stood before her like a looming mountain. To be clear, I seriously doubt this means that she's the mother of the ancient dragons, considering she has 2 wings, 2 legs, and no stone scales. No, instead, she would specifically be the mother of the 2-winged dragons that you see widely across the lands between. Indeed, the Japanese specifies that she's more of a great mother of dragons, rather than being mother of all dragons. So, if we take that premise to be true, that means that the fire-breathing dragons, the ice dragons, the rot and glintstone corrupted dragons, all of them trace their ancestry back to Grail. These are the wyverns, contrasting with the true 4-legged dragons, which is the same dynamic that Dark Souls had as well. And just like in Dark Souls, Elden Ring's dragons have a tendency to take on aspects of their environment in lieu of their stone scales. There are ice dragons, there are glintstone dragons, all of that, but the one element that these dragons didn't master though is lightning, red lightning, that remains exclusive to their ancient ancestors. Earlier we talked about how lightning has heavenly connotations, and it makes sense that this lightning would be lost to these lesser dragons who were born in a time long after the ancient dragons had sort of lost the favor of the greater will. These modern dragons are now easily wounded by the stone scales that they've lost. These stone scales, once removed, are called gravel stones, and these are compound stones that are found in lands once beset by ancient dragons. For the most part, these gravel stones are looted upon the Altus Plateau and surrounds, which makes sense because this is the territory of Leyndell, the city that the ancient dragons would eventually assault, so of course this is where their scales would be found. But interestingly, the only other place where gravel stones are found is Caelid. And that's curious because Caelid is literally at the opposite end of the lands between. One set of gravel stones are found here and here, suggesting that at some point the ancient dragons, progenitors to Graol, were in Caelid as well. And this fact is supported by other environmental evidence in the area. Again, the Bestial Sanctum and Farum Great Bridge are in Caelid, two cultural landmarks of Farum Azula that are architecturally intact, despite the crumbling city's current state. These weren't just ruins that fell from the sky, these were built. They are a grounded connection to what we now know as a sky city. While I guess we can't rule out the possibility that Farum Azula was always in the sky and later built architecture on the ground here, it seems way more natural to assume that the city was originally built on the ground where there would have been the materials to build it, and that it was then lifted into the sky at some point in the future. As for the mechanism behind Farum Azula becoming skybound, I feel like there are two options. Earlier we talked about how the Ruin's Greatsword is a piece of Farum Azula, infused with gravitational magic, thanks to the meteor that struck the city. Thus, my first theory is that Farum Azula might have become skybound in the instant that the meteor struck, floating upward as it was destroyed. Alternatively, or additionally, I guess, it could be some manifestation of the storm that brought Farum Azula into the sky. We've talked about how Placidusax might have had power over this storm, evidenced by his golden time-twisting scales. Not to mention, you turn into a storm cloud when you channel Placidusax's weapon skill. So perhaps Placidusax, or the ancient dragons, whipped Farum Azula into the skies as some measure of protection, and once it was up there, that gravitational meteor could have come into play, smashing the city into pieces on its way down to the lands between, scattering ruins far and wide. At any rate, I'm glad there's evidence of Farum Azula here in Caelid, and that's because this fact merges so well with the lore of Graol. Again, Graol is the mother of the modern dragons, and thus is the oldest modern dragon that we know of who lost their stone scales. And since she's in Caelid, it was likely from here that all dragons spread. So I'm glad the environment supports this lore with its intact Farum Azula architecture and with the leftover gravel stones of the ancient dragons as well, because it seems like the ancient dragons made landfall here long ago and started a culture in Farum Azula, leaving Graol behind eventually as their land-bound legacy. And there are two other ancient dragons in the vicinity to help support this claim as well. These ancient dragons appear here in Limgrave and here in Caelid, both dead at the sites of dragon communion. The ancient dragons are immortal, but they can still be killed, as you know. though we can only really speculate on what killed these two. But back to Grail. Despite being a modern dragon, Grail is large. Larger than any other dragon of the time, even Placidusax. In fact, the only thing that comes close to her in size are Grandsax and the bones of the dragon in Farum Azula's Dragon Temple, which Zuli has thankfully placed alongside Grail for me. They're both very similar in size, which made me think that maybe they could have been mates at some point, though of course that's just speculation. And in the end, we don't even know why Grail lost all of her stone scales, passing this trait to all of her descendants. Perhaps it was nothing more than a random birth defect, which reminds me, Seath's loss of stone scales was never really explained either, yet he also found himself apart from his ancient kin, all the same. Perhaps this is why Grail found herself in the Lands Between. Was this a place of exile? Maybe a place to die? Her region is called Dragonbarrow, after all, and if you've read Lord of the Rings, for example, you might take the meaning of the word barrow to mean burial mounds, referring to ancient burial places that are covered with large mounds of earth. Perhaps the Dragonbarrow was a place for these newly mortal dragons to die. And Grail herself is indeed now finally dying. The Scarlet Rot has blighted Caelid and the Dragonbarrow, and this is presumably why, when we encounter her, she's already lost a lot of her health, and she can't fight back, nor even lift herself off the ground. Her dying roars rally her kin around her, but they cannot save their mother. This level 1 Tarnished just watched this sick YouTube guide on how to get 50,000 free runes at the start of the game, and nothing will stand in their way. Now, we previously established Caelid and Grail as a sort of origin point for the modern dragons, so after them in the timeline, I think it's the Ice Dragons that would have shown up as the first major variant. According to Borealis' Mist, the Ice Dragons were once lords of the mountaintops. Perhaps these dragons wished to be as close as possible to the heavens, from which their ancestors descended. After all, we do see the modern dragons flying all around Farum Azula, though they never make landfall, so the mountaintops might have been the next best thing as a home for the mortal dragons. After all, the Sword of Night and Flame claims that the mountaintops nearly touched the sky. Anyway, Borealis' Mist goes on to reveal that the Ice Dragons were lords here at a very early point in the Lands Between's history, as shortly after, we know that they were chased from the peak by the Fire Giants, who also appeared at a very early point and who claimed the mountaintops henceforth. So, for the Ice Dragons to be here, you'd think surely they must have migrated here from Caelid. Now, we previously established Caelid as an origin point for these modern dragons, so for the Ice Dragons to be here, surely they must have initially migrated here from Caelid. Now, obviously they could have just flown from Caelid to the icy mountaintops, but I remember early theories that posited that a land bridge might have once existed between Caelid and the mountaintops, and that certainly would have helped with their migration. As the theory goes, Caelid and the mountaintops are almost exclusively where you'll find the monstrous crows, the giant dogs, and most notably, the remains of the giants. These don't really appear anywhere else, and it seems way more likely to think that there was once a land bridge here, rather than thinking that they took the long way round the Lands Between on foot. What happened to this landmass is unclear, but the Lands Between itself has experienced many other geographical upheavals in the past, and losing a landmass to a meteor or whatnot might also explain the divergent evolution of the Ice Dragons compared to their fire-breathing kin. Also established in the mountaintops around this time were the astrologers, who preceded the sorcerers, established themselves in mountaintops that nearly touched the sky, and considered the fire giants their neighbors. This description comes to us from the Sword of Night and Flame, an heirloom of the Carian royal family, which is headed by Renala. Renala was a prominent astrologer, and thus has links to the mountaintops of the giants. It might be a stretch to say that she was actually there in the mountaintops all those years ago, but she did have an oath-sworn giant and an oath-sworn dragon that can be summoned to fight for her, so I feel like it's safe to say that she's connected to the place, at least. At any rate, eventually the fire giants would chase the ice dragons from the peak and claim it for their own. Then, in turn, the Zamor, an icy race of warriors, would ally with the Golden Order and oust the fire giants. This is incidental, but later in the timeline, a character called the Snowy Crone pops up. She's an old witch associated with Caria, who wielded snowy magics that, you could argue, would have been derived from the Zamor's icy mountaintops. The Zamor are, after all, the only other beings that could use cold sorceries, so perhaps she learned it from them. This Snowy Crone eventually imparted her cold sorceries to Ranni, and Ranni has clearly taken on such frost magics as a big part of her sorceress identity. Now, a couple of dragons actually had a habit of eating glintstone sorcerers, and it was from this diet that they were corrupted, not unlike the other dragons who took on aspects of their environment. One of these dragons was Smaragd, fought here, whose glintstone breath incantation reads, "Smaragd was a devourer of sorcerers, and over time his body became corrupted by their glintstones." Another such dragon is fought here, defending Ranni in both of her major quest locations. This is Azula, and she drops a cold-infused sorcery that is representative of her knighthood, and it reads, "Azula, a devourer of sorcerers, was bested by Ranni and subsequently swore a knightly oath to her dark moon." This suggests conflict between the early sorcerers and dragons, and this tendency for there to be conflict helps to explain why Renala might have gained an oath-sworn dragon out of these conflicts. And just like her mother before her, Ranni also had an oath-sworn dragon of her own, Azula. Azula reveals to us the mechanism behind this oath. Ranni bested Azula in battle, perhaps earning Azula's loyalty and respect, a trend that actually continues later on with some other ancient dragons that would attack Leyndell, but we'll get into that soon. The only living ice dragon we meet is Borealis the Freezing Fog, who remains upon the mountaintops, and yet the item most closely associated with him is actually found all the way back in the temple quarter of Leonia. It is the Ice Rind Hatchet, and its description reads, "A hatchet with a frost-coated blade, one of several gifts given by Castle Sol in the distant north. Known as Freezing Fog, the blade is thought to be a dragon's scale." Indeed, this is the dragon scale of Borealis, because just as the scale is known as Freezing Fog, Borealis also has the words Freezing Fog as his namesake when you fight him. Apparently, this scale was retrieved by Borealis's neighbors at Castle Sol, who then gave it as a gift, presumably to the Leonians, since it is found near their temple quarter. Obviously, such a gift would have been given to facilitate relations between the two lands, and as we established earlier with sorcerers like the Snow Witch and Renala, there is grounds to believe that these two places would have had a connection in the past. These days, though, Castle Sol is currently still a mystery to us, and without knowing their political alignments, it's hard to know for sure why they gifted Leonia with the scale and other gifts as well. That said, there is a phantom in Castle Sol who hails Lord Mikola in his dialogue. Thus, it's possible that Mikola was Lord of Castle Sol and that Mikola was giving gifts to Leonia. And there is evidence that Mikola had friendly relations with the Carians, at least. Most notably, in version 1.0 of Elden Ring, Loretta's armor instead belonged to cut enemies called Arbor Sentinels, who served Miquella, but who actually hailed from Raya Lucaria. To quote their cut description, these enchanted knights once belonged to the Carian royal family, but were later gifted to Miquella. Thus, perhaps Miquella, potential lord of Castle Sol, gifted the Raya Lucarians the Ice-Rind Hatchet, and several other gifts besides, in return for all the knights that he had gained from them. Again, this is all just speculation, but this is the best theory I've got on the relationship between these two lands and why the Ice-Rind Hatchet is found in Liurnia. On the same plateau as Castle Sol is the Cave of the Forlorn, and it's a unique little cave, guarded by Great Worm Theodorix. Theodorix is a magma worm, a land-bound dragon that looks more like a giant lizard than a dragon. He's in this form thanks to the act of Dragon Communion, a primal ritual that involves consuming a dragon's heart to become a dragon. Didn't work out so well for him, but his scale sword, at least, resembles a dragon's jaw, and the weapon suggests that Dragon Communion is a grave transgression, for which the magma worms were cursed to crawl the earth upon their bellies, shadows of their former selves. If they were cursed to be this way by any entity, I'd suggest it was the Greater Will, who we know favored the ancient dragons long ago. And to be clear, only the English description says they were cursed. The Japanese description is nowhere near as damning, simply saying that the heroes have erred, and that their land-crawling form is the end result. To me, it sounds more like these people were simply fools to think that they could achieve such a metamorphosis. It goes against the rules of nature, especially if you're trying to transform into a being like an ancient dragon who were graced by the Greater Will in a bygone age. And I think, more than it being a curse, I think this is more of an example of hubris backfiring for each and every one of these partakers of Dragon Communion. The Magma Worm's scale sword states that these land-bound dragons were once human heroes. But that's only half true for Theodorix, who was a hero, but who wasn't human. He was actually a troll. His incantation, Theodorix's Magma, states that the name of the ancient troll warrior, Theodorix, lives on, as a hero of the war against the giants. Actually, maybe his troll heritage explains why his magma worm form is so much tougher than the others. It has so much HP that, fun fact, you can actually lure a land octopus to help you with this fight instead. And I think that's the intended way, because this guy is tough. What's also fascinating about this guy is that he was specifically a hero of the war against the giants, a battle that many of his fellow trolls participated in, betraying their giant ancestors and fighting alongside the Golden Order. Now, I assume Theodorix was still a troll at this stage and not a magma worm, but whatever the case, you could definitely speculate that he is still loyal to the Golden Order even now, even here after his metamorphosis. I argue this because of his placement outside the Cave of the Forlorn, which has an end boss wielding a legendary armament, the Golden Order Greatsword, one of Radagon's own weapons. The Leonine Misbegotten themselves are curious as well, with internal files calling them Children of Radagon, but that's a whole nother topic. Unique to this cave also is that right inside there's a fire-breathing dragon, dead and half entombed within the ice. For this type of dragon to be preserved in this place might support what I speculated on earlier, which is that Grail's fire-breathing children must have come up here to settle on the peaks before becoming ice dragons. And It might also support the theory that Rennala acquired an oath-sworn, fire-breathing dragon just like this one, early in the days when they settled here alongside the astrologers. Or maybe it's just here because a dragon hunter is right outside. And I say dragon hunter because even though the dragon-hearted, like Theodorix, aspired to become dragons by consuming their hearts, that doesn't mean that they respected their lives. A phantom can even be found saying, "I'm dry as a bone. Full dragon, surrender your strength. Let me feast on your heart." As for the hearts of these dragons themselves, they are riddled with gravelstone. You'll recall gravelstones were the scales of the ancient dragons, making it somewhat ironic that the mortal dragons actually do have these same scales, just within their hearts, not on their flesh. As such, their hearts, which are clearly imbued with some ancient dragon immortality, are still alive and beating, according to the description. And so, when you consume these hearts in what is absolutely a sacrificial ritual, especially considering the heart is still alive, you're actually consuming gravelstone, ingesting the key components of the ancient dragons via the hearts of their mortal kin. It's pretty metal. Indeed, when you partake in dragon communion with the heart at the dragon communion altars, you're doing so right in front of a dead ancient dragon, not in front of a mortal one. Thus, you really are striving to be like the ancients. Churches were built upon the corpses of these undying beings, who became likely unwilling conduits for countless dragon-hearted heroes who wished to channel the power of dragons. Finally, the Dragon Communion Seal. It's formless because it's made of dragon blood, and even though it's a seal, Dragon Communion is too primal in nature for the term incantation to be appropriate. Thus, this seal scales incantations with one's arcane attribute. So, yeah, it's no wonder that all of the dragon-hearted are considered to be so depraved.
You must not forget, though, those who partake in Dragon Communion will one day shed their humanity, their hunger for dragon, their yearning only worsens until the floodgates burst, unleashing eternal torment, the strength of a mighty dragon. Magnificent, but deadly. It's no surprise that Dragon Communion is ruinous.
This is Yura, who you first meet in Limgrave, and nearby, beside the dragon-burnt ruins, is the mortal dragon Agheel. Agheel frequents this place, coming to burn the mindless nobles and their effigies here, which is exactly what the nobles want. After death, most in the lands between crave a proper Erd-tree burial, but now, in lieu of that perhaps, the dead gazed at the skies over the lakes of Limgrave, praying that the dragon's flames would burn them to ash. They want this kind of release from life. If you get Yura to assist you in taking out Agheel, then it's possible to get him to say this.
That was my first dragon hunt in quite some time. Paired up with a hothead like you, it was just like old times.
So, Yura was previously a dragon hunter, which helps to explain his familiarity with communion. And since being paired up with a hothead like you was just like old times, that means he must have once had a companion. The most likely candidate for this is Eleonora, a Drake Knight that Yura tracks all the way to the Altus Plateau only to plead with them on a very personal level.
Please, Eleonora, yield to the cesspool no longer. Do not stain the immaculacy of your sword, your flesh, your fire.
The precious little we know about Eleonora stems mostly from her Drake Knight armor, which is crafted from dragon wing membranes and features the spoils of a dragon catch as an emblem of pride as both dragon hunter and partaker of communion. From birth, Drake Knights speak not a word. They spend their lives pursuing the strength of dragons for its sublime beauty and inspiration of awe. Therefore, while the Drake Knights have more reverence of dragons, they are still partakers of communion. Thus, as they consume more hearts, their eyes become yellow and slitted, and inevitably they have a fate waiting for them as a magma worm. So, given all you've heard about communion, is it really any surprise that there would be a dragon named the Dragon Communion Revenger? This is Xekis, who guards the decrepit Temple of Communion in Caelid, attempting to prevent this abhorrent act of dragon communion via sheer will and hatred. For Xekis had the misfortune of taking on the Scarlet Rot as his aspect, something that has clearly taken a toll on him. But according to his incantation, Xekis, Dragon Communion Revenger, did not forget his hatred, even as he succumbed to the Scarlet Rot. So Xekis, at least, has a very good reason for attacking you, as he's preventing access to the nearby altar of Dragon Communion. But speaking of dragons who attack humans, let's turn our attention to the ancient dragons, who would one day attack the city of Leyndell. These ancient dragons attacked with all their might, bringing with them Grandsax, an ancient dragon who is the largest dragon in the game, who rained calamity down upon the royal capital with such force that this marks the only time in historical record that Leyndell's walls had fallen. Thus began Leyndell's war against the ancient dragons. It's hard to know for sure why the ancient dragons attacked Leyndell. If you want to go full tinfoil hat and tie it to our earlier speculations, then you might say that it's because they finally realized their god had fled here and become the Erd Tree or something, but that might be stretching it. That said, they probably did come here because of the Erd Tree. After all, according to the Protection of the Erd Tree incantations, in the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erd Tree, and the ancient dragons were probably no exception. So it was that the ancient dragons fell upon Leyndell, their forces consisting of at least 3 dragons that we know of: Lanciax and her red lightning glaive, Fortisax and his twin pillars of red lightning, and Grandsax, a gargantuan dragon wielding a physical weapon, actually, a decision that seems unique to them. This is the Bolt of Grandsax, a weapon that's actually mirrored in Placidusax's fight against us here. It's unclear whether Placidusax is echoing Grandsax or if Grandsax is echoing Placidusax, but the fact that Grandsax shares a weapon with Placidusax, and the fact that Grandsax is so large, certainly makes me think that Grandsax is the closest thing the ancient dragons might have had to a lord at the time of their attack upon Leyndell, at any rate. But this weapon would eventually fall from their grasp, as the great Grandsax was slain, their stone body and weapon becoming this permanent landmark within Leyndell's walls. According to Lightning Spear's description, Godwyn the Golden defeated the ancient dragon Fortisax, known as the mightiest Boulderstone. Assumedly, Godwyn could have executed Fortisax here, or perhaps compelled Fortisax to swear an oath to him, just like Renala and Rani once did, but instead he befriended his fallen foe, and as a result, Fortisax would be loyal, so loyal that Fortisax would eventually go beyond to fight against the death that would take his companion, becoming a Lich Dragon, his aspect afflicted with death itself. So, to recap, when Godwyn was murdered on the night of Black Knives, the Rune of Death was carved into his being, destroying his soul, but not his body. And so it was that his body spawned Deathroot, fragments of the Rune of Death that spreads its influence throughout the lands between, spawning the visage of the Prince of Death, who was Godwyn, in its wake. And while Godwyn does seem like a lost cause, Fortisax fought against the death within him nonetheless. So it is that Fortisax occupies a deathbed dream within his friend, fighting this impossible fight against the corrupting influence of the Rune of Death, which has now corrupted Fortisax. But I still don't think that Fortisax has been completely corrupted. When you fight against Fortisax here, you actually do so to bring about the age of those who live in death, and considering Fortisax fights against you, you could speculate that Fortisax is still vehemently opposed to death and those who live within death, even now. Check out this video for more on that. Anyway, so it should come as no surprise that this friendship between Godwyn and Fortisax was seen as significant in Leyndell when Fortisax was first defeated. This moment of friendship was so significant that it would make allies of all the ancient dragons and give rise to the ancient dragon cult in the capital city. It seems the ancient dragon cult was born out of a desire to defend the Erd Tree. As stated by the malformed dragon set, after the great ancient dragon Grandsax attacked, the tree sentinels had an epiphany. The only way to truly protect the Erd Tree was to become dragons themselves. So it was that these regular tree sentinels became draconic tree sentinels. As a fun side note, the 1.0 description of the malformed dragon set instead talks about a dragon worshipper named Gnarl, who I speculate is this individual defending Malekith in Farum Azula. His set once read, "Once a dragon worshipper from the capital, it said that he pulverized his golden armor with his bare hands in a fit of religious fervor, covering it in his own blood as he reshaped it in the likeness of a dragon." But anyway, in the final version of the game, there's more than one draconic tree sentinel, and they wield armaments whittled from dragon claws, so that they could better honor the ancient dragons in their worship without resorting to the primal act of dragon communion. And conveniently, for them it was found that dragon worship didn't clash with belief in the Erd Tree. The Gravelstone seal says as much, stating, "After all, this seal and lightning itself are both imbued with gold." And this goes beyond just color. The ancient dragons were originally a part of the Greater Will's plan back in Farum Azula, and their golden scales reflect that. And after the Dragon War, these ancients became a part of the Greater Will's plan once more, albeit in a more subservient role than in their previous age. One thing that's kind of difficult to reconcile with the dragon cult is the fact that their prayer books, cookbooks, spells, and even a draconic tree sentinel can be found in Farum Azula. Special thanks to VLimit on YouTube for making me aware of this. The ancient dragon war in Leyndell would have surely happened after Farum Azula's age had passed, so how did all of this get up there? Either Farum Azula became skybound much later in the timeline than I thought, or perhaps dragon cultists simply traveled up to Farum Azula with these relics somehow. And I think this second theory is much more likely, because in an earlier version of the game, Farum Azula was actually called the Storm Eyrie, and was, and I quote, "a place that only dragons can reach." This reminds me a lot of Archdragon Peak in Dark Souls 3, which could only be accessed through a sort of draconic meditation. So perhaps Farum Azula was once planned to be accessed in a similar way. For all we know, it could still be canon that those in tune with dragons are spirited up here. For instance, some banished knights certainly found a way up here, and they have dragons cresting their helmet. And this helmet once described how they sought the Storm Eyrie, presumably through revering dragons. Therefore, I feel like remnants of characters being spirited up here due to their association with dragons is a bit of a holdover from a past version of the game that still exists in the current version. And while we don't get spirited up in the current game by becoming a dragon, we are certainly spirited up here. This teleportation occurs when you sacrifice Melina, or yourself in the Frenzy ending. Now the mechanism behind this is kind of unclear, but there is sort of a prophecy that helps to explain it. Melina's Blade of Calling reads, "The one who walks alongside flame shall one day meet the road of destined death." So, whether you walk alongside Melina, the Kindling Maiden, or the god of frenzied flame, or you're Alexander tempering yourself in the flames of Gelmir and the Giant's Forge, you're going to make it up here one way or another and meet the road of destined death. Speaking of which, this also explains why Banal is up here. According to his beast champion armor, his maiden threw herself into the fire, just like Melina does for us, which is what gets us up here. And he too also has a fate that ends with destined death, just like we do. So there's definitely some sort of fate associated with destined death that is spiriting us up here, I think that's for sure. And to explain most others up here in Farum Azula, well again, I personally think that they were likely spirited up thanks to their draconic nature, as explained by the cut content from that earlier version of Elden Ring. For all the humans who desired to commune with dragons, there was one dragon who actually communed with humans, Lanciax. Lanciax was the sister of Fortisax, and while you fight her as a dragon in-game, long ago she took the form of a human, to better commune with the Dragon Knights as a priestess of the ancient dragon cult of Leyndell. The fact that she was able to take human form is pretty amazing. This is almost a reflection of dragon communion, but instead of changing form and communing with dragons, she's changing form to better commune with humans. A part of this communion, apparently, was love, and according to Dragonbolt Blessing, only those loved by dragons can survive the ordeal of cladding their bodies in lightning. And of all the knights, Vike the Dragon Spear was the one Lanciax loved the most. Fittingly, Vike's Dragonbolt is unique in that it clads him and his spear in red lightning, the signature weapon of the ancient dragons, reserved up until this point for the beastmen who served them in antiquity. This also marks Vike as a dragon cultist. Therefore, it's kind of crazy to think that a dragon cultist almost became Elden Lord, something that surely would have had implications for the age that would follow, if Vike was to take the throne. This must have made it all the more painful for many when Vike suddenly disappeared, traveling below Leyndell to visit the Three Fingers, where he was burned by their frenzy, armor and all. Knowing that he was a dragon cultist certainly helps to explain how he got down here. The fact that he was surely this highly regarded member of Leyndell's dragon cult, you'd think would open doors for him within the city. So Vike likely could have made the trip down here easily, despite the existence of the Three Fingers being sacrilegious to the order up above. We get little information on why Vike made this trip, but in the end, we eventually find him imprisoned within an Everjail. And whether this imprisonment is self-imposed or not also remains a bit of a mystery. But anyway, back to Lanciax, who loved Vike. The most interesting thing here with her, I think, isn't just the fact that we've learned that dragons can turn into humans, it's the fact that dragons can love. Perhaps this love and powerful emotion is part of what makes them so loyal. We see many becoming oath-sworn, and then Fortisax, for example, going so far as to sacrifice himself entirely for his friend. And it's this fact that makes the Elden Lord Placidusax's abandonment by his god all the more tragic, for their god would never return, and Eventually, a Tarnished would find their way beyond time, putting an end to the Dragonlord and hewing their remembrance into the Erd Tree. In the end, all that remains is Placidusax's ruin, the dying wails of the Dragonlord, who once dwelled eternally beyond time. Thank you for watching. But before I go, do you want some Elden Ring wall art to adorn your walls? Well, Displate has you covered in this video because they're back helping to support more Elden Ring lore content. For a limited time only, they are giving you these deals on screen to pick up some Displates in the next few weeks. Link in the description. So the choice is yours. You can literally get official Elden Ring art to adorn your walls. For example, this shot of Godfrey and Vike look absolutely stunning. But then you can also get some Elden Ring inspired pieces from my store, if you like. For example, this is Guardian of Moonlight, which features a dragon defending a moonlight sword from nightly intruders. Or you could pick up Early Days, which gives off some Elden Ring vibes from back before the game was even released, if you were around then. Or if you're a fan of From Software games in general, you could go and pick up The Painted World, with Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring all condensed into one world. It'll take you hours of scrutiny to discover all of the references that we've hidden in here. As I've said so many times before, these prints are made of metal, they're easy to hang, and somehow they achieve this gorgeous color depth and accuracy that exceeds most of the traditional prints that I've sampled. Again, links in the description, and thank you for watching. It feels good to be back doing Elden Ring lore. My goal now is to wrap up everything I can before the Elden Ring DLC drops, so there should be some good times ahead, you know, bringing in the new year as well. Before I go, earlier I shouted out Loki's theory on the Nameless God, as I call them, and I'd again like to remind you to go and support Loki and check out their other lore content for yourself as well. And if you have any other suggestions for other content creators whose theories you'd like to see cited in future lore videos, please let me know and I'll do my best to do that. Special thanks also to Mispap for doing an incredible edit of this video. The footage looks amazing and it's incredible that he can get this much quality footage even for a video that is an hour and a half long. So I hope that fact really helps you guys watch the content and engage with it. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next lore video.